Thanks very much for coming along to this session. The next hour and 15 minutes we'll spend talking about OneDrive for Business, predominantly from a deployment perspective and the types of considerations and planning aspects that are important to get this guy up and running. My name's Spence Harbour. I'm based in Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. I'm perhaps known for SharePoint, but these days I work predominantly with Azure Active Directory and Office 365. I was involved in the Certified Master programs over the previous 6 or 7 years. My contact details there if you want to follow up with any questions on any of these topics, basically. If you can't do that during the event, you can follow up with me, preferably over email. Twitter, I don't tend to have an SLA for responding to that guy. So the objectives for this talk is really to understand the changes that have been made in Service Pack 1 for SharePoint Server 2013 to enable us to configure OneDrive for Business redirection effectively from our on-premises environment to the OneDrive cloud offering. And also to kind of position OneDrive for Business as significant first workload for the cloud. In many cases, organizations have struggled with my sites historically in terms of their deployment and management. And so OneDrive for Business makes a tremendous amount of sense as that kind of gateway drug to Office 365, if you will. Okay, so we'll talk through the identity considerations, spend quite a bit of time on this because that is fundamentally the most important piece of the puzzle in terms of configuring this workload. We also need to do that for any other hybrid workload that we want to configure as well. So that's tremendously important to understand both the options that we have, the pros and cons of each one, and to really kind of have a solid understanding that if we're going to these types of scenarios, these workloads, we're making a long-term commitment to identity coexistence with the Microsoft Cloud Service. We'll talk through how do we do the configuration for SharePoint on premises. We'll look at some of the Office 365 configuration. That's all very simple stuff. And then we'll talk about how we think about migrating users to the OneDrive for Business from perhaps some other storage location. So yeah, I've already mentioned this, really OneDrive for Business being a kind of gateway drug into the value of the cloud. It's basically personal storage, what we might be familiar with as a My Site in the cloud, and then we have a redirection capability within the user interface within our SharePoint sites to send the appropriate users to the correct location for their OneDrive. Simple is good. So if you have a SharePoint background, you'll understand or be familiar with the history of the My Site, effectively a discrete document library for sharing and personal content. Hello. Thank you. He's gone now, right? Yeah, good. And it's a private environment, right? So it's personal. And that's effectively the same thing that we will configure using OneDrive for Business with the benefits, over and above what we can do with the on-premises SharePoint product around, security, rights management, etc. So from the identity perspective, we have a sign-in that we need to perform, and we have 3 options for configuring our identity coexistence, if you will. To be fair, there's really only 2 that count, because whilst we have the option to use a cloud identity, that's over on the left-hand side, that's not going to work for any hybrid scenario. And this scenario that we're configuring, or talking about configuring today, is a hybrid scenario. So the idea of using a Microsoft account is not going to help us here. And of course, wouldn't be able to use it to sign into the on-premises aspects of the deployment anyway. So we're more focused on either directory synchronization or federated identity. So I'm going to skip the cloud identity slide because it's pretty much irrelevant to this topic. We've got a little animation. Basically, you sign in with an Azure AD account, which is managed in the cloud. So for directory synchronization, we're talking about integrating our on-premises Active Directory with Azure Active Directory by effectively synchronizing or replicating the user objects into the cloud so we can sign in using our on-premises identity to cloud services. So this is, the kind of middle ground, if you will. It gives us the sort of lowest barrier to entry in terms of the amount of configuration necessary, but it doesn't give us a full, seamless single sign-on experience or single sign-on-like experience. It's quite important to understand that we're not, even when we do federation, we're not actually doing single sign-in. It just it looks and feels like single sign-in to the end users. The disadvantage of this approach is that we basically don't have any high availability options here, right? We've got a single point of failure in terms of our synchronization between on-premises and the cloud. So if that's acceptable to us, great, we can carry on with that. But for most large organizations particularly, that's not going to be acceptable to have a point of failure there. I have another animation basically just showing that you're signing in using your on-premises credentials to access the cloud services. And then the last option, really the best option, is to use federated identity. So we're basically deploying alongside directory synchronization, Active Directory Federation services to enable that single sign-on-like behavior. Now, the disadvantages here, of course, is we need to deploy more infrastructure on premises. Now, we could deploy all of this stuff in Azure, of course, right? It doesn't have to be on our premises. It can be in somebody else's. But there's more machines, more machines to manage, more machines to patch, etc. And you obviously need a SQL Server to support the ADFS as well. So there's a lot more planning considerations here around, the infrastructure side of things. But this gives us basically a way to enable hybrid scenarios and have that long-term identity coexistence with Microsoft. And we can sort of start with directory sync and then move up to federated identity if we want to do so. But really, this should be the goal for every hybrid scenario, whether it's OneDrive, Search, BCS, etc. And we have another animation. Okay, so let's switch now and talk about the SharePoint Server on-premises configuration. As you should be aware, that we have a link in our top navigation bar of SharePoint that's basically going to allow the users to get to their My Site on-premises. And we're going to use a pretty simple mechanism to determine which users should continue to use that and which users should be redirected to the OneDrive for Business service in the cloud. And we'll do that via a HTTP redirect. So the prerequisites for this is we must be running SharePoint Server 2013 Service Pack 1 and above. We're obviously going to need an Office 365 subscription, and our users need to be licensed, etc. And we need, again, federated identity for the seamless experience. But it is really very simple to configure. And basically what we'll do is, based on an audience in the user profile service, we'll use that mechanism to determine which users should be redirected to OneDrive for Business versus those who may want to stay on premises. So we have, a lot of flexibility with that audience. There's no kind of prescribed way of doing it. It's not like you have to be in a group or there's a particular attribute. It's up to us as the customer to determine how, to figure out how we determine which users should be redirected. And of course, in the end game, for most deployments, we're going to want the vast majority of users to be redirected to OneDrive for Business. But think about things like test accounts and service accounts and the other junk that might be in the user profile service. We don't want to be having to deal with provisioning of OneDrive for Business sites for those types of accounts. So we're not using, interestingly, any form of claims-based identity to do this. We're using an audience. Which gives us a lot of flexibility, but we also have to understand that audiences need to be compiled and maintained. So it's an additional piece of kind of runtime management of the SharePoint on-premises farm that perhaps is not being done up until the use of this feature. Sorry, the clicker is. Okay, so let's take a look at the configuration of this, if I can switch over here. Okay, so very simple environment here. On the screen at the moment is my on-premises SharePoint environment. Just got a regular team site there. Oops, sorry. It's these these links here, where you can see that it actually says OneDrive, but right now that's going to go across to an on-premises my site. And then over here, obviously, I have my Office 365 subscription, which is where I want the OneDrive sites to be configured under this tenancy. So it's very simple stuff. I'm basically going to go into the SharePoint machine itself here. I'm in Central Admin. And the first thing we need to do is think about the audiences. So if we just flip to the user profile management screen here, you can see I have 10 users. Oops, sorry, this is not being nice to me at the moment. I can't get over there for some reason. Believe me, there's 10 users there. If we dive in here and just do a search, you can see we've got some test accounts there, service accounts, and a few users just for the purposes of this demonstration. So if we flip back over to the UPA and have a look at the audiences, I've already gone ahead and configured one here called OneDrive for Business Users. And if we have a look at the properties of this, you can, excuse me, you can see that we have 2 members of this audience. So I ran this earlier today, or yesterday in fact, to populate this. And if we have a look at the membership, you'll just see that there's 2 users here, Miles Davis and this other character who you may or may not know. And these are the users that will have their redirection take place to the OneDrive for Business site once we configure the next step, which is not in the user profile. So we have to go back up to the top level of Central Admin. It's in the Office 365 area down here, which is introduced in Service Pack 1. And go into Configure the OneDrive and Sites links. And all we're doing here is basically telling the system the URL for the OneDrive for Business site. So that's our SharePoint Online tenancy. So I have that over here just so I don't have to type it, or you don't have to watch me type. And then I'm going to go ahead and select that audience that we were just looking at before. Oops. Now I have another option here to redirect the sites page. So that's if I'm following sites, whether I want to do that in the cloud or have it remain on premises. I would be very much advised not to click that Everyone button there, because that's going to, every account is going to then be redirected to OneDrive for Business, and that might include all of those junk accounts that might be in the user profile service. Click OK, and that's it. So as now from this point on, if I come back over here, I'm just going to refresh this page. And I'll go ahead and then click this link. It checks to see whether I'm in the audience, and it should, in a couple of minutes, redirect me to the OneDrive site. Although I'm signed in here as somebody else, so I'm just going to come out of here. And it's not working. Interesting. So I must have done something wrong. Definitely in that audience. Just double check that. Yep. Interesting. Okay, we'll leave it for a little bit. It might get itself together in a few moments. Not sure why that is not redirecting at the moment. It was working earlier. One point to note, though, is we also have the same configuration now in SharePoint 2010. So we can do this same configuration with SharePoint 2010 on premises. We were able to do it before via PowerShell, but with the February cumulative update this year, we have the same link down here, and we have the same configuration settings. Obviously, we don't have the follow sites because that's not part of SharePoint 2010, but we have the audience selection and the My Site URL there. Oops, let's get rid of that. Let's just have one more look at this. Yeah, so it was provisioning the site for that user. And this would be, basically the shared documents library of the My Site for the users. So the other user, Bob Fox user, was still being provisioned behind the scenes. The other thing to have a quick look at is just from an administration perspective in Office 365, we can choose how we want these links at the top to be displayed. So we go into our SharePoint settings from tenant administration. Eventually. And just come into the general settings. And we have this top nav bar user experience settings here, which allow us to choose whether we show or hide the OneDrive for Business links, the sites links, and so on. So very simple configuration. But of course, to have this all working, I've already done that identity federation in this environment, and I've obviously done a user profile sync on premises as well. So those are the things really to think about from an administration perspective. If we're going to use this audience, we need to be confident that the membership of the audience is correct, so that we don't have a confusion across the user population, with different experience. And also just be aware that, if it's a large audience, that's going to be a time to compile that. The on-premises AD synchronization needs to be in good health for this to work well. So that's kind of the downside of not using the everyone button. We have more responsibility to manage the health of the user profile service in order for this to work seamlessly for our end users. See if this is, no, it's still going. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the slides, which was number 4, I think. Okay, so there's some screenshots here in the presentation that's basically what I showed you in the demo. These were here for, oh, it's all gone blank. There we go. So these are really just, so that you have them in the slides. They're basically the screens that I showed you during the demonstration. Obviously, this farm is nice and green and healthy. Mine's a little red and unhealthy. A sign, really, that you have a good SharePoint farm if it's red or yellow there at the top, right? And yeah, we're just basically walking through the same things that we saw in the demonstration there for future reference. And the Office 365 configuration is just the options that we saw at the top of the settings screen in tenant administration. But also think about, obviously these users need to be licensed. We need to think about our storage, how, what kind of quotas might be in place, etc. All of the, things that you would normally consider about a My Sites deployment are actually just as relevant to OneDrive for Business as well. We don't have some of the same limitations, of course, and that's why this is such an attractive feature, because we don't have to deal with, terabytes of data for users' documents on premises anymore, but we should still think about, the control aspects that we may want to put in place to make it more manageable for the users themselves rather than IT. So these are the links that we saw. So in terms of deployment, there's some other things to think about. Primarily, we want to think about how to make the slide properly. Sorry about that. Those little white dots are supposed to be in the middle. One of the key things to think about is if we want to manage the deployment of the sync client, to the desktop computers. So if we want to customize or do other administrative control of the click-to-run installer for Office 2013. So this is how we can download and install the client. We basically have the bits themselves and then a manifest that allows us to do things like enter in make sure that the license agreement has been checked and so on and so forth. So it's very simple stuff, but it's quite important to have this in a good state across the estate for our users. We can also think about how that sync client is going to apply any updates. So by default, effectively, we're going to do automatic updates, but you might want to think about changing that if you don't want to deal with that interference on a particular day. We can also point to an internal file share, so grab the updates from there, or we can turn it off in terms of updates entirely, so that it's then completely under our control as to when and how we push out any updates to the sync client to our end users. Another thing to think about is the bandwidth considerations. It's always interesting when we look at migration scenarios to any cloud service that the bandwidth planning aspect is often kind of forgotten, and then it has impact during the migration itself. So the bandwidth calculator, which you can grab from the Microsoft Download Center, does a really good job of allowing you to understand, based on some mean metrics, how much bandwidth is going to be necessary, therefore give you a much better indication of how long some types of migration scenarios will take. Very important tool for any hybrid scenario. So in terms of migration, there's kind of two ways to do it, right? There's one thing that's driven by IT, or the IT organization, so that's basically going to manage the client deployment and make sure that users understand the change, what they might need to do in terms of their files, or sort of look at it from a more business perspective, or an information worker-led managed migration, so different sets of users can move at different times. And then, of course, we have the tooling to support either of these. So the easiest way, of course, is to just drag files into our OneDrive folder in Windows Explorer, okay? And it works just great. But this is really for simpler scenarios where you don't need to worry about the metadata on documents being preserved, or you just basically want to give a large number of users quite a long time and say, right, well, over the next 6 months, this is the new location for that content, and it's up to the end users effectively then within that period of time to migrate their content over. And isn't that an awesome animation? I think it really should just be going in one direction, but hey. Other things to think about is, before we can move stuff into the OneDrive for Business site, it needs to exist, right? And so just like with SharePoint on-premises, the site is created the first time it's accessed. That's the default behavior. And that makes most sense, right? Because we don't want to be provisioning a whole bunch of empty sites that aren't really empty, right? They're taking up storage, even if it's just a little bit. So, if we're going to do some kind of tool or scripted migration, we need to already have those sites in place. So we're going to need to basically pre-provision the OneDrive for Business sites and deal with the permissions on those sites. So we have the ability to do bulk provisioning via the client-side object model, and therefore, obviously, also with PowerShell. We basically add a list of user identities using their email address into a queue, which is then batched up for creation. And currently, the limit there is 200 in the queue. But remember, this queue is shared by all tenants in the environment that's hosting this, right? So you may get hit by some throttling. There's no way to guarantee a speed here, because depending on what else is happening in that farm, things might slow down or speed up. This is something that's being worked on as we talk to improve the ability to do bulk provisioning of all sites in SharePoint, not just OneDrive for Business. So this is the client-side object model API. You can see it's called Create Personal Site Enqueue Bulk. And then we pass in an array of emails. Okay, and we've obviously got a max value there, 200 of the queue. So if we want to call this with PowerShell, we're basically using the profile loader object and then we'll call the same method on that guy from PowerShell. So it's very simple, okay? There's not much that can go wrong here. Just remember that queue limit, and you would obviously try and add in some additional instrumentation into this in order to get some metrics on speed and so forth. But it's a very simple operation. The next thing we need to think about is adding permissions to that site that's been created, because if we want to use some kind of tool to move content from maybe a file share into these users' OneDrive sites, we have to remember that they're personal sites, right? So it's only that user has permission. So we're going to need to basically loop through the sites that we want to work with and add in an account that will be the process identity of the tool or script that we're using to perform the migration. So this example basically just gives us that, and we're looping through basically all the users going to each site and adding in the migration account in there so that it has permissions to add content at a later date. So again, simple things, but very easy to kind of overlook when you're planning this scenario. Another thing to bear in mind is the Migration Pipeline SDK, which is coming in about a month or so, which will give us a much better import API in order to support migration scenarios, and it's leveraging the Azure blob storage API improvements. So this will give us a much better way to do faster migrations that also don't have an additional negative impact on the rest of the SharePoint Online service. Another thing to think about is ISV solutions. So there's many ISVs in this space. They're all in the exhibit hall. Each of these may be options for your requirements, especially if you're concerned about preserving metadata on documents, or you have any kind of information management policy requirements as well. So it's something to consider if you're looking at a large-scale migration. It's not that we're going to recommend one ISV or another. They all have pros and cons. It's got to be driven by, obviously the requirements around information management, metadata, etc. Now, one of the things that trips up a lot of earlier migrations is around the restrictions in the OneDrive service. So we have, obviously some file name characters that may be, common on a Macintosh, that are either reserved in Windows, or they're ones that OneDrive for Business itself doesn't support at present. Now, the other session earlier in the week from Jason Moore on the Sync Client Roadmap covered this in more details, but we'll see lots of these things, especially with, if we start with a space or an underscore, for example. We don't actually see that in Windows Explorer, and for most end users, they're going to have the default settings for Windows Explorer, right? They're going to hide the file extensions and all of those kind of things. They're not going to see hidden files, for example. So you need to think about that, especially if we're doing an information worker-led migration. So there's a little script that Bill Baer put together, which basically takes those reserved characters and basically loops through a directory, and will spit out a little report of any problem files there might be. So again, very simple way for end users to check their content as they're doing a migration across. Okay, so we basically got to the end of the slides very quickly. I was hoping that the demo would have worked, which it still hasn't, unfortunately, so I have no idea why that didn't perform the redirect. Something I'll try and look at, and I'll post an update as to what the cause of that problem was, if I can find it out later this afternoon. So to recap, basically, we've covered the main planning perspective of how we would look at deploying OneDrive for Business, talked through how we're doing, we have a requirement for identity federation for a seamless single sign-on user experience, how we configure the redirect using an audience, and then the actual creation of the My Sites themselves. all of these things, again, are quite simple, but it's very important to understand all of that up front to enable the right type of migration for the given organization. And obviously, think about OneDrive for Business as a very attractive, from an IT perspective, replacement for expensive and difficult to manage on-premises MySite document storage. And so with that, I have no more material. I'm not sure this clock is correct. I'm happy to take Q&A, but if you do have Q&A, please use the microphone so that that's captured for the recording. Otherwise, thank you very much.
As opposed to pre-provisioning, for things that are auto-provisioned, is it possible to create a template or hook that into an app that would do some custom provisioning?
Sure, yeah, you could build a custom solution either as an add-in or even like a Windows client application that would call the same CSOM APIs to do the queuing, and you could report on progress and those kind of things from that type of implementation. Yeah.
And that would hook into the current method. When somebody accesses their site for the first time, it would be able to trigger this?
Yeah, well, if the site isn't already provisioned, then the first time they click on the link, it will get provisioned. And they'll see a progress bar whilst it's being created. You can't do anything to prevent that other than already pre-provision the site.
Okay, I'm sorry, don't quite catch how can that though be hooked into your own app that would do your own pre-provisioning?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Go ahead.
Related to actually ongoing process when there is maybe a large organization, the members in the audiences are changing, and some of the members have provisioned their OneDrive in a cloud, but they are moving to other role in the organization. Mm-hmm. So they, of course, need to move their data somehow back to the on-prem OneDrive. So is there any preferred way how to handle that in a large scale? Or actually, what is the way to do that different than just direct the user to move his data from one site to the other by himself?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult area in terms of, the tooling is very much kind of a one-way, a one-time hit, as it were. And obviously, yeah, if people are moving, it's going to impact, obviously, the management of the audiences is the key problem here. In terms of if they should no longer have the OneDrive for Business site and they need to go back to on-premises, it's definitely it's all achievable via the API, and then obviously when it's the audiences updated, the redirect will take them to the on-premises My Site, but you're basically having to kind of do the script the other way around in terms of the migration, and that's not something that there's currently tooling for. It's feedback we've heard a lot, and I would imagine that we will at some point produce some scripts to help with that scenario.
So that would probably mean some communication to the user as well, basically that he needs to know that his OneDrive is not available for some period of time because the script will not be just one shot.
Yeah, exactly. There'll be like, a couple of hours or a similar kind of period of time where they won't be able to use it whilst you're moving the stuff back, yeah. Okay. Yeah, something to think about as well is, the hyperlinks that they might use for items if they're, sharing content with other folks, and that is also, it's a user education piece, if you will, that perhaps we would rather it didn't exist.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe to that, with the new OneDrive for Business that is coming, do you know if there is anything, maybe with a sync tool or with something that will help with that scenario?
Not to my knowledge. Jason would be the person to ask about that for sure. I haven't seen anything on that.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Hey.
My question is about the users that have been moved to OneDrive for Business in the cloud using the targeted audiences that you were showing there. Their profile attributes, especially when you're on-prem, you've got some additional user profile attributes like about me or my interests, things like that. So Where do these users still update those attributes? Would it be up in OneDrive for Business in the cloud, or is it still on-prem? Do they still have a user profile on-prem?
Yeah, it's still the user profile still exists on-prem. It has to support all the other things in SharePoint that rely on it. They will be prompted. If they click on the About Me and those screens, then that will take them to the OneDrive for Business, the SharePoint Online side of things. They'll still be able to use the URL for the on-prem if they're updating their own properties.
Okay,
So if I just switch over, I can show you that, I think. Get the right number. Yeah, so it's still taking it to on-prem here, you see. So,
but once that user gets moved up to OneDrive for Business in the cloud, then when they navigate to their OneDrive, they go to the cloud, and that's a second MySite host for your organization if you're doing on-prem?
Yes.
And it's only the users that we purchase licenses for that we would define in our target audience to go up there.
Correct.
But they would still have an on-prem profile.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
the profile still exists because we need that for workflow, for the apps authentication, and a bunch of other things in the rest of SharePoint on-prem. So they've still got their profile. They still need to, you still need to manage that for them on-prem.
And when other users that have not been moved to the cloud, click on that person's name within a team site or something, does it take them to their profile? Well, it'd be the local profile, right?
That would be the local profile. Yeah.
But then if they're sharing a document, then that's because they've shared it out and they're linking up there.
Yeah.
And I got another question. I don't know if you know, is the max file upload size 2 gig for the OneDrive?
I'm not 100%. I think so, but I'm not 100% on that. I think that was a limitation that was being spoken about being removed, but I'm not sure if it has been or not yet. And that's another question for Jason.
For Jason.
Yeah, Jason Moore.
Is he going to have another, is he having a session still?
He's already given his session. I think it was yesterday, but you'll be able to look at it on the recording. It's basically called I Think, Therefore I Am.
Oh, yeah. There was something else going on at that time. And is this the place for personal files, everybody just to put them up there? And I mean, are there any downsides to doing this? Like, let's say I put 100 gig of content up there, and then
the service is designed for that kind of scale and to very much support that, right? Whereas doing that on premises has always kind of been a bit of a scary thing to do from a SQL Server storage and cost perspective, and that's why this is so attractive. Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, there is no effective limits like that are in play, other than if you've got a whole ton of documents all in one place, for the end user that might be difficult for them to work with. But for most regular users, if you will, that's kind of how they manage their files on their laptop anyway.
Right.
But yeah, from my perspective, there's no technical limitation around size, in the same way that we would kind of in the past dissuade customers from just moving everything from like a P drive to a on-prem MySite just because of the cost of it. With OneDrive for Business, that consideration goes away because we're not, Microsoft are taking care of all that, and so you don't really have the same considerations.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely be confident of it from a scale perspective. I mean, some of the ones that we've seen already are very large indeed, engineering diagrams and that kind of stuff.
Well, one thing that we're looking at doing right now is maybe using this as the where everybody has their personal files, and maybe when we provision a laptop to somebody, we don't have to go back up all their personal files. They'll be up in the cloud, and then it'll allow them just to sync them down as they need to, right?
Absolutely.
So, thanks a lot, Spencer.
Cool. The gentleman at the back there, or further away.
Will we be able to alleviate bandwidth concerns with OneDrive and Office 365 using Azure ExpressRoute now?
I'm sorry, can you say the last part of that again?
Azure ExpressRoute for OneDrive and Office 365?
Yeah, that certainly improved the migration considerably, and I think they updated the calculator to include that as an option. I'm pretty sure that's available in there as well, so it does improve significantly, basically, the migration time.
Okay.
Yep, at the back there.
This on? Okay. So if our business objective of deploying OneDrive for Business is to stop users from using personal cloud storage solutions like Dropbox or Box, what kind of metrics can we use to show, hey, that person has migrated their data from this personal storage to OneDrive for Business?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically, what type of tooling or scripts can we use to help us measure, a rate of migration? It would all need to be either custom scripting. It was quite simple to do on a Windows machine or indeed on a Mac. But there's also the ISVs that I mentioned have, in some cases, those tools have built-in metrics for showing total amount of content migrated by user, by type, that kind of thing, to give you that kind of information. Okay. But yeah, it's not something that the service itself has, other than the quotas that you would see in the tenant administration. That's all we have on the Office 365 side of things at present.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your use cases, they're really required or spoke to users moving their own data. In my organization, we didn't have any on-prem SharePoint existence. We went straight Office 365.
Okay.
We've also always redirected home directories to a network share utilizing offline file synchronization. We'd like to be able to shift that into a OneDrive scenario. What kinds of things are in place to be able to help force that, to make that transition? Is it still just standard file and folder redirection?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Standard Windows file redirection is basically the way to take care of it. You could also use junctions if you wanted to, junction points. That's kind of an old school way of doing it, but okay, that would work as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No problem. So the gentleman on the far, go ahead, on the far left.
Just a question regarding if we don't have SharePoint currently deployed either in 365 or on-premise, what's the onboarding process for using OneDrive?
Well, it's basically a question of the user licensing in Office 365 is basically the step that needs to take. So you need a tenancy or need a subscription to SharePoint Online basically for this. And then you license the users once they've been synchronized. You assign them a license, and then they have the capability.
All right, so there's no additional, we don't have to go through a whole bunch of configuration of the SharePoint Online before we can use OneDrive?
Nope.
All right, thank you.
Yep, go ahead.
Each OneDrive personal site is its own site collection. Does it make sense, or is it feasible even to remove the site collection administration from the user or for full control?
You can't really. There's ways to. It's always been an interesting discussion, in terms of wanting to limit what the user might be able to do in the site, or perhaps prevent them from causing accidental damage. But yeah, we really need the user to be a site collection admin. There are other ways to do things like prevent the creation of subsites and so on. There's add-ins that can give you those kind of controls. But yeah, you always want the end user to be the site collection admin for basic operational capability. Add-ins
within the extended permission set or by a third party?
Well, it would be custom code, yeah.
Okay.
Custom code.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any ISVs today with a solution for that, but I know a couple are working on them. But it's a relatively trivial customization. It's probably 25, 30 lines of JavaScript.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. So first is with respect to e-discovery. So I have my e-discovery module on-prem. I'm pretty sure that with the hybrid search scenario, from my e-discovery on-prem, I should be able to search the content on my OneDrive. Will I be able to put legal hold from on-prem e-discovery module?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The second question is with respect to my site cleanup job. Will it be able to take care of that scenario?
No, the My Site cleanup job is effectively unaware of this configuration entirely at present.
So what's the recommended process for that if suppose somebody leaves the organization?
Yeah, well, the best way to deal with that is to basically implement your own My Site cleanup job. Kirk Evans has a blog post that walks through how to do that. And basically, so you disable the out-of-the-box My Site cleanup timer job, and you'd have your own process to manage that. Again, it's a relatively simple customization, but it is a customization you need to do.
So from my on-prem, like custom My Site cleanup job,
Yep.
I should be able to clean up the OneDrive?
Oh, no, you would need something else for the OneDrive for Business. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yeah, for that, there's obviously the background maintenance that isn't exposed, okay, so the work that Office 365 operations will do. But if you wanted to have a similar kind of capability for perhaps compliance reasons, you'd need to look at using an Azure web job or similar to implement what effectively is a timer job for the cloud. So the patterns and practices guys, the Office 365 developer patterns and practices have a sample of a long-running operation tool in their patterns and practices download. So that would be the best way to approach that scenario.
So there is no standard, like even considering the scenario, I don't have anything on-prem. I just have on my OneDrive on cloud. So how does it work there? How does that My Site cleanup thing work there?
Well, if let's say the user becomes unlicensed or is deleted, leaves the organization, then that is taken care of by the Office 365's version of the My Site cleanup timer job, right? I mean, that's not what they're running, but they have a very, a similar tool running in the background to clean up, sites. And you get the same experience with, emailing the secondary owner, so that there's a period of time where you might want to grab the data before the site is deleted. All of that is a very similar experience to what you would see on premises. How it's being done is different, but we don't really need to know how it's being done. So you get the same capability that you have with SharePoint on premises for the OneDrive for Business sites in terms of removed users or any kind of compliance where you want to kill a whole bunch of sites for whatever reason.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yep, so one more in the middle.
Yep, just one more. So we have a lot of student accounts that we're going to be making, and right now we have we have a Federation server in DirSync, and I currently have a script that will automatically create Active Directory accounts for the students. Can I also, using PowerShell or whatever, have that pre-provision them a site in Office 365?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then can it also license them?
Yeah, yeah, so all of the steps in terms of, obviously the user being created in your AD on-prem, then obviously you want to wait till that's synced to the cloud. Then with the script you would be able to assign the license and pre-provision the site.
So that's all kind of my question more is do I have to wait for DirSync to sync the account, or can I make it in AD? Can I make it in Office 365 at the same time with the same email address and then let DirSync kind of link them together later?
Yeah, you need to wait for the user to be synced to the cloud. Not really any way around that. It's very simple to just query, keep polling in the script, and then once it's present, then you can proceed to the next steps. But yeah, there's not a way to kind of do that in a nicer way, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so in a traditional file server home folder scenario, if a user leaves, we can drop their home folder into their manager's home folder so they have that data, or whoever is replacing them, we can just rename it and they would have access. How do we do that with OneDrive? If an Office 365 user gets removed, they leave the company, and we still want to keep their documents and get them to somebody else.
Yeah. So again, we have a very similar kind of administration experience as we would have with SharePoint on premises. So let's say the user is leaving or has had their account deleted, and we don't kill that OneDrive for Business site straight away. The secondary owner can be emailed or that user's manager, and then they have permissions to go ahead and get the content, maybe move it somewhere else, or indeed just keep that site going forever, right? As a different user has control of it. Because at the end of the day, it's just a site collection. So we have all of that control capability that we would see on premises as well.
So for the individual OneDrives, then, is there a default second user?
That's configurable via the tenant administration screens,
okay.
so we can choose that. A lot of people use like the SP setup account, or account like that.
Mm-hmm.
Would
Service
kind of
account,
advise
basically.
against using that kind of thing and have it be, if possible, depending on the organization, have it be the manager or the two-level up manager, perhaps. But that's very much a business decision based on the culture of the organization and how willing the manager is going to be to deal with that, right? Especially if they have a lot of reports. But yeah, you have that configuration capability.
Thanks a lot.
Hi.
Go ahead.
You demonstrated the removal or hiding of the OneDrive and other links in Office 365. Is that possible on premises?
It's possible, but we don't have a direct configuration screen for it. But it's configurable either through JavaScript injection. I think somebody in the community has built like a central admin page that gives a very similar look and feel. I'm pretty sure there's one out there. I'm not so sure I'd deploy that, right? Because that's a full trust solution that's been put together by somebody. But yes, it's basically UI manipulation would be the best way to deal with that on premises.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. I think we're done with questions. Thanks very much.